Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Hello, and welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And if you're watching the video feed, you already see the two guests that we have for this week's episode. That's right. It is 2022, and this is the first guest episode we have of the year. Woo-hoo! And so, all right, let me introduce, as I am looking at them, here we go. We are one of the originators of our video, the video element of our podcast, one of the first people we ever did a collab with, Dr. Maz Mary. Woohoo! How you doing, Maz?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. We're so happy to have you. You really classed the joint up. We have a legit, but to balance out the classiness, we have one of my best friends.
My best friends by the sound of it.
Yeah, from
on the left end of the bell curve.
I'm trying to. What did we talk? Did we talk about Star Wars or was it sci-fi stuff?
And we talked about late 70s, early 80s Disney too. With
that's right. Yep. Yes, and the Black Cauldron, which I had in my possession for way too long.
I can't remember what we called that one, but he was an integral part of that. His Black Cauldron take alone was.
All right, welcome Brian Crossland. Woo-hoo!
Glad to be back.
How are you, my friend? Yeah, we're so happy you're here. How are you?
Doing well.
Good.
How are you guys?
Good. So welcome you guys, and this is a show that we've had in the making for a while. And what I can't remember the genesis of this idea kind of came organically out of a chat. I think it started with Brian. We were talking about, hey, Brian, we want you back on. What can we talk about? And then we just kind of started listing movies that might be fun to talk about, and sort of the theme arose from that, didn't it? Am I remembering that correct?
Kind of. We had a hard time putting the show together because we didn't have a theme attached to it. So it's a cool idea, right? Mm-hmm. Can we just tell people the idea while we're talking about it?
Okay. So, I think it started with the kinds of movies that we're going to be talking about, and then it kind of got expanded to we're calling this the dad movies. Conversation. This is movies
and this show is a very specific segment of
this is those movies that as we were growing up, like on a Saturday afternoon, and you're flipping through the channels, and all of a sudden they're like, oh hey, this is a movie I remember, oh we got to watch this one. And very specifically, we were going to be talking about World War II war movies.
Mission movies.
Mission movies.
To get really specific. These are with more or less, so they're all mission movies. Yeah.
And so these were, like, for me personally, it was like on a Saturday early afternoon, like on Channel 9, flipping through the channels, and all of a sudden my dad would go, oh, but Patton's on. Let's watch Patton.
Channel 9 with the Alan Parsons Project playing between the commercials.
Absolutely. From iRobot.
That's right.
Album,
done.
Well done. Yeah. And so these are the movies that, you just sit and watch with your dad, and you swap story, that weird bonding that occurs over war movies. and boy, there are many.
Yeah, there were a lot to choose from. We got a pretty good group here. We should probably start talking about them because
let's jump right.
And 6 of them, and
yeah.
But I guess before that, do you guys have specific memories? I'm sorry, Joel. Joel's trying to do the show, and I'm like, wait, let's do it this way. Yep. I mean, because I the shows I used to watch with my dad specifically, Dad on the Couch. Because one of these, and we'll get to it when we get to it, where I just was like, I was watched the whole thing, and he had to explain the entire thing to me because these films were a little bit weird. I remember, Dr. Mary, when you were on the show, you talked about specifically this phenomena of your dad loving different types of stories and how that drew you in, and that your love of movies. You're not a big cinemaphile, but you're a huge movie fan, which is kind of what we are as well. That, you know, looking up to your dad and wanting to get into what he was into, even if you couldn't, and how you grew with those stories as you sort of grew up and matured and kind of understood them better. That was my experience completely. We talked about, go ahead.
No, it's mine too. Exactly. It's, you know, you watch these complex movies and you think, I don't understand this. And then he's explaining it to you and you think, my dad's a genius.
That's right.
Not knowing he's seen this film like 30 times and could probably recite it to you.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And of course, one of those movies.
Zardoz speaks to you.
Zardoz is a war movie of a certain kind, I suppose.
Does take a lot of explaining. I'll give you that.
Zardoz is a light watch on a Saturday afternoon.
It's cool. They're still trying to explain Zardoz. Even the people who wrote it can't explain it. That's a special kind of story.
Now, Brian, you grew up in the DC area, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes,
yeah. So you know, I would guess that I don't know. Did watching these war movies in the nation's capital, was that something that even registered?
Well, it did, because, you know, a lot of the films, especially in the 70s and late 70s, early 80s, even part of the 60s, like the ones that my dad really liked, were all very American centric, right? America is the savior of the war in Europe. The British are off to the side. It's like, what? No, like it took a while for me to understand historically that was not the viewpoint, right? That America played a very late part in the war, but the films didn't say that. My dad didn't say that. People in Washington, D.C. didn't say that. They're like, America's the greatest thing ever, like, because that's how you viewed things when growing up in that area. So there were a lot of these films that when we watched them, I did need the explanation like Maz has, you know, where you're like, wow, Dad really knows, you know, a ton of stuff. And then some of it you find out is Dad doesn't know everything, right?
Part of growing up.
Yep.
Exactly. And sometimes Dad got a skewed view of history a little bit. But something that, you know, like my dad had was an interest of not only the perspective of, you know, the American side, but also the opposite side, the Axis side. So there were films that, you know, he'd watch, you know, that had to do with the Germans or the Japanese. And it's like, oh, this is an interesting, you know, perspective. And he was a big war gamer. That's how I got my love of war gaming, was all the war games he has. I still have some of his old ones upstairs, and building plastic models. And he had a ton of plastic model equipment that was just, most of it was German armor. And I was like, why are you so fascinated with this? He's like, oh, I was the best on the battlefield, blah, 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 blah. And to understand that and like look back in history and be like, yeah, the time period, that was some of the best on the battlefield. And they still got their butts kicked. Like, just goes to show that the best technology doesn't necessarily win the day, right? So yeah, there were interesting perspectives in the DC area. There's a lot of respect for especially the weird respect for the Germans in Washington, D.C.
Weird. Yeah. And of course, by war games, you mean like taking an old PC and hacking into the Defense Department.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Trying to start World War III with a chess.
Yeah.
gun. No.
Yeah. I'm assuming. Yeah. I think I speak for all of our audience when we're going. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. That's what you do on a Saturday afternoon. Is
for the older generation, I'm talking the Chit and Avalon Hill Chit-based games. So
nice.
And crickets across the internet. I was like, what?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's like 3 of our listeners going, woohoo! Yeah,
exactly.
Oh my god, he just made
everyone else is Googling the shit out of all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
By 3 of our listeners, he means one of our listeners with multiple personality disorder too.
That's true. There's that.
Nevertheless, if you connect with just one person, Brian, that's the important thing.
Yeah, even if it's myself.
Indeed. Sometimes that's the most important person.
Yeah.
What do we? You got anything on that front, Joel?
Well, no. I mean, it was mine is very much the same. It's these, the 70s and 80s were a very specific time in movie making and in telling war stories. I think one of the things that, well, we'll talk about this as we're getting into as we get into these movies. Obviously, like Brian said, so many of these movies are just very America centric, and rah, here we go, and that was, as a young kid, that was the big takeaway. And now seeing these movies again years later as an adult, obviously I see a lot more of the nuance and depth and some of the things that they're kind of throwing in there, and it's not all just war is great as long as we're and we win every
good guys, right?
As long as you're the good guys and we're not hey we win every battle, right? And you're like, oh yeah. And so what about you, Ryan?
Well, it's the same. I mean, it would, like I say, the show was sort of inspired by what Dr. Mary was saying. We were talking about In Harm's Way and some other things. Those are sort of, again, they're a little, that kind of movie is a sort of elevated film from the kinds of movies we're talking today. But there's a lot of really good film craft, and it does feel a little tonally off with all that's going on in the world, that we chose this weekend to speak about the fun war movies.
Yeah.
It's sort of stupid, but it's too late for that. Here it is. The show will live on, and maybe you'll be able to gain some extra perspective about it. But it was bonding time with my dad. My dad's we're from Minnesota, sure as you know if you watch the show. He was a hunter and a fisherman and an outdoors guy, and the one time where we could come together was this. It was in front of the TV, and he didn't sit in front of the TV. He read the Wall Street Journal and kept track of all his stock options and stuff. But if a certain kind of story was on, if it was spooky, or if it had astronauts that traveled to an ape planet, or it was a narrow thing where we could come together. But or it was these World War II movies, particularly these ones where, hey, we got to go get that thing and bring it back, or we got to go blow that thing up, like that sort of story with a linear drive that I could kind of stick with no matter how many tangents it went off on, was great. And we absolutely did sort of bond over those, and he and I still get together. This last one accepted because of COVID, but we've seen every Bond movie in the theater like since Octopussy or something together. It's a tradition. We don't miss one. Wherever I am in the country, however long the movie's been out, whatever theater we got to find our way to, we've always done that. And so it's cool that we have that connection. He went on a business trip out to New York and knew I was into theater, and I wasn't. I mean, I did a little when I was a kid, but I wasn't going on these fishing trips, and you know what I mean. He didn't have to buy me a rifle or anything. Like, at a certain point, I just sort of bowed out of that routine that he and my brothers sort of took part in. And so he was like, oh, well, Ryan, we'll go out to New York and Ryan can pick some theater show that he wants to see. And they just made a point to make things fair. And one of the reasons we got to that point, which was an important thing for us, was because we'd sit in front of the tube and watch these certain kind of movies. I mentioned one of them and now I'm forgetting the name again. I think it was called the Rat Patrol. You looked up the name of the TV show for me, Joel, while we were doing a show, which were these desert. It was this TV show with these desert. Yeah, Rat Patrol. Where these guys, they were just like a reconnaissance patrol in northern Africa. And that was a great show. And so every time that was on, I don't remember many of the details of the show, but I remember the opening credits really, really well, which were like MASH and some other things were like all taken from a movie apparently that launched the TV show. So
yeah, Rat Patrol in color.
I'm super grateful for that connection. And so there's a fondness for these kind of films that go with that, just like similar to the way like a song that was playing on your first date or whatever, like just is evocative of something more than just what the thing is itself. And so I'm interested to explore that a little bit as we go through these.
Yeah. It was strange. After watching the first movie we're going to talk about, The Big Red One, which was a movie that I had a lot of connection to. Before we talk about the movie specifically, I called my dad afterwards to tell him that I had rewatched it and actually watched this newer version of it that we'll speak on in a moment. And as I have grown up, my father and I our ideologies or political ideologies have diverged, and that and we've gone through some tumultuous times and figuring out how we can talk to each other about things, and so I was like, I rewatched The Big Red One, and oh my god, it's way better than I remember, and I remember it fondly. And my dad was just like, his response was, really? You watched The Big Red One? And I'm like, yeah, it was great. And it was great. And he was like, it just surprised me that you watched that. And I'm like, what? I can still watch these movies. I know I'm a. And so anyway, it was, anyway, it was like, okay. Well, the movie's great. Let's talk about the movie. And we should, let's the four of us talk about the movie. Big Red One. From 1980.
I'm just here for Luke Skywalker, baby.
Well, yeah. So, that was one of the things that brought me in. It was like, oh, this is the guy from Star Wars is in this, and of course the guy from Paint Your Wagon. No, I'm kidding. But no, Lee Marvin stars as a lot of these war movies of this era. They always have that grizzled, war-hardened sergeant or commander type or whatever, that's seen it all and gone through it. And this one's no different with Lee Marvin playing that.
Indeed, this one might be one of the best ever, actually.
Yeah,
Marvin is outstanding in this movie.
Yeah, and that might be my biggest takeaway from this, is just how good Lee Marvin is in this, and how much I didn't appreciate that. Obviously, as a kid, I didn't appreciate the finer things that he brought to this movie. But Big Red One follows the exploits of the Big Red One, the first
infantry,
the first infantry, and they are the first into battle. They are the first ones in to scout where battles are even going to occur. And Lee Marvin leads the first infantry, and specifically this group of four guys that just don't seem to ever die. Everyone else does, but these four guys somehow managed to stay alive through the whole thing, through battle after battle, and it's amazing. And one of those guys is played by Mark Hamill in his first movie after the initial success of Star Wars. And
Bobby DeCiccio and Robert Carradine.
Robert Carradine. It's Robert Carradine's POV essentially. I mean, it's
Robert
his
Carradine.
story.
This movie was written and directed by Samuel Fuller, who was actually part of the 1st Infantry. This is it's really his war memoir, and it has. Despite what Joel's mentioning, how all the bullets seem to miss these guys. Other than that, and that we have to get to all these different theaters of war: North Africa, Sicily, France. It has the authenticity that comes with coming from a first-person account. And Carradine's character, he was going to be Private Griff until they found out they could get the dude from Star Wars, and then he was sort of demoted. But Carradine remembers it at that as being a disappointment to him. But he says, looking back, he says he's in just the right role. And what he found out that he didn't know when he was reading it was that he was Samuel Fuller. He was the stand-in for him as a young man in World War II.
Yeah,
and that plays with a lot of meaning. He's a cynical kid.
Yeah,
but he still kind of he gains a lot of wisdom and a lot of perspective from his experience. And
well, yeah, and that to me is one of the big things, is that these 4 guys, especially at the top of the we don't meet them like at the start of their military. They've already been in it for a while, but yet they still have that youthful swagger, that youthful invincibility, feeling like, oh yeah, this ain't it. I ain't gonna, no bullet's gonna get me. And you see that kind of chip away a little bit as the movie goes on. And of course, I say all the bullets miss them, and I that isn't entirely true.
Not entirely true.
Yeah,
Lee Marvin
gets Lee Marvin gets pegged, pretty early on, actually. But doesn't die, but he does take a bullet. But this movie, I mean, we talked about how these are mission movies. Big Red 1 is mission after mission after mission after mission.
Yeah, exactly.
This one is, these guys are the first ones in and have to find where, figure out what the Germans are doing in, where Rommel's, what is Rommel's path that he's carving out to try to get to, and so that they can get that intel back. That's a big part of this, is the constant communication from Lee Marvin back to the higher ups. And
the other thing it shares with all these films sort of share is it's this little mobile unit that's out doing stuff. That's this tight little group of people, and that's a great way. That's a great thing to be able to hang a good story on. Yeah. I want to say one thing. I've told this story before, but I have to tell it again, because here's Big Red 1, and this is when we're talking about it. But this is one of my favorite behind the scenes stories ever. When Lee Marvin showed up, and they were going on like they do for a lot of these films, of these surfer kids from the 70s, they don't know anything about war. So they put them through this sort of couple of days or a week, even back in those days, boot camp, basically, so that they can get some semblance of what being a soldier is. And these guys showed up early, and they were hanging out with each other. And then Marvin kind of showed up at the last minute, as you'd expect a guy who had served and had been in, this is like his 12th Army movie, basically. He shows up and doesn't know any of them. I mean, he's not exactly a method actor, but he makes a point not to make pals with these guys, especially during this boot camp process. But nevertheless, it's a movie and it's Hollywood. So they're all sitting in the back of this big Lincoln town car or whatever, on their way to, where they're going to learn how to fight and shoot and roll over and stuff like that. And Marvin, who hasn't said a thing to any of these people, hasn't even shook their hands, is in the car with him. He says, "Which one of you guys is Carradine?" And Robert goes, I'm Robert Carradine. He goes, "Yeah? F you, Carradine." And that's it. Then he doesn't talk to him again until they're like out in the field or whatever. Of course, over the course of this film, is just shot over like a 2-month-ish period, which then is a pretty long time to be spending together, especially on location. They got to know each other, and they weren't quite so scared of Lee. And Carradine comes up and he goes, "Hey, you remember when we were doing the training thing and we were in the car and you were like, F you Carradine? He's like, huh? Yeah. I remember. He's like, well, why'd you say that? And he goes, you were the only one who had a name I recognized.
That's a nice way to say hello.
Yep. That's pretty fantastic.
It's as great behind the scenes backhanded compliment as anyone's ever going to get, really. It's super funny.
So I was able to, on Ryan's recommendation, the movie that came out in 1980, very good movie, but it was very much chopped up by the studio to get it within an acceptable runtime, and various other reasons that a studio might have, and so Samuel Fuller, obviously not happy that it was that the final cut was taken out of his hands. So there were long rumored that there was all this footage and
9-hour version of Big Red One, all those sorts of legends that crop up when this sort of thing takes place.
Yep. And so then after Lorimar Pictures was purchased by Warner Brothers and blah blah blah, all this stuff happened. Some people are like, hey, can we check to see if this footage does exist? And rumors started swirling around about boxes in I think it was like in a St. Louis storage locker, or Kansas City storage locker or something like that had that was like labeled Big Red One. And sure enough, they get in there and they find all of these reels and a shooting script that was labeled Samuel Fuller on it. And so some filmmakers, including like Peter Bogdanovich and some others, decided, let's digitize all of this stuff and let's see if we can put this stuff together based on what's in this shooting script. And so what came about is it's labeled the Big Red One, the reconstruction, because the idea being that they're reconstructing the film as close as they possibly can to Fuller's vision. This happened after Fuller had passed away. And so the result of this is a movie that is 45 minutes longer. And it's so good. And some of the differences are the biggest difference is that there's a Nazi character that in the original movie is just sort of more a shadowy specter kind of, right. You don't really know much about him. In this one, he is a full-fledged character. He is absolutely the antithesis, or he is the Nazi version of the counterpoint. Thank you, of Lee Marvin. He is the Nazi version of that sergeant.
What's his name? It's fantastic performance.
Schneider. The dude's name is. I was looking at the trivia here real quick. That guy is.
He's not likely to come up on our show very often, so I'm gonna give him some love.
Siegfried Rausch.
Really
good old Siegfried Rausch as Sergeant Schroeder. But yeah, no, he's fantastic. And you really get there's this scene where he's getting a massage from this woman, and this woman is massaging him, and like he'd be like, and she'd be like, oh, sorry, I didn't, and where did that one and he recounts like, oh, this one I got shot in North Africa. And he said, he talks about how I got, and it's a scene that we already saw that our group from the Big Red One in earlier. And then he's like, oh, this one I got in Sicily. The guy had flowers in his helmet. I couldn't believe it. And, it's like, and which is a callback to a, great scene with Lee Marvin and this girl bringing him his helmet all covered in flowers. So yeah, I mean, this new version is so good. It's so good. That was the main reason I had to call my dad, actually, because after watching it, because I'm like, Dad, I got to get this. So I went and purchased it based on how awesome this is, and that I'll give it to him for. I already told him, so I'm not spoiling anything if he listens to this. Which he does occasionally, but that'll be his Father's Day gift. And I'm like, you got to see this new version. It takes a really good movie and elevates it to a great movie. Big Red One is it's so good, and this is the kind of movie. This and Patton were the two big movies, big war movies in our house. And while Patton really leans into sort of the mythicalness of this guy, this general, Big Red One, one of the things I loved about it is sort of the even though we've already joked that these guys, the bullets always seem to miss our four main guys. The battles do seem to have they take a toll. Like we talk about in like fist fights and fighting movies where somebody just takes a beating after beating after beating, and yet they still have all the energy in the world right after the scene's done. This one, you see the guys get worn down as the battle gets longer and longer and longer, and so it has a real worldness feel to it, and that's one of the things I really appreciated. So not only do I love the Big Red One, this new version instantly elevates it to just might be one of my favorite films now. It's really, really good.
You fellas got anything to say about Big Red One? Did you check it out? Have you ever seen it?
I have. I watched it again, but I did not see this reconstructed version. And I remember sitting there watching it again recently going, again, this German character, Schneider, is there. And we see him, and he's supposed to be, you can tell that he's supposed to be about, where's the rest of his story? He just walks off into the sunset from the ambush at the cross. And it's like, okay. And now Joel's telling me, it's 45 minutes of footage on a cutting room floor.
That's
okay,
mostly
go see this.
Yeah, that's mostly this dude. Yeah, we'll watch it. We'll watch it sometime. We'll give it some time to settle. We'll watch it.
Yeah, it makes I always thought that the bookends of the film were a little like what? And this makes it all work. Like it's still like what? It still is what it is, but it just that the extra stuff really does tie all that together and makes it a much more thematically rich thing. And seeing this I think they don't need quite as much of it. They really put everything back in that was in the shooting script. Mm-hmm. But the fact that all of that stuff where you just never experience Schroeder except when he's with our heroes in the regular cut, and it's still a really good movie. But to have all of this, to have his parallel story be told and to see where they intersect and the weird way, because they're not two freight trains that are going to collide with each other. The way they intersect is weird, and it's like you would expect. There's a reality to it that's kind of amazing. One thing I want to say, I'll pass it on to you, Dr. Mary, after that. All the Germans playing dead in the tanks and stuff. That sequence haunted me my whole childhood. I only saw it on TV the one time, and it was one of those things where I had the thought that something's not right here. Part of that's just movie magic. It's all full of tension and my dad clearly knew what was happening. And I remember being pissed at him that he didn't tell me what was about to happen, so that I had to be surprised by this sort of outburst of violence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I haven't seen the extra length version at all. I haven't seen this film for a while. When you put the list out, I thought I better see Cross of Iron because I haven't seen that one. I hadn't seen that one in years. But isn't there a scene in the Big Red One where there's some woman gives birth in a tank?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a scene where Mark Hamill says, they're stringing her legs up with the ammunition change. He goes, point the bullets the other way.
Point the bullets the other way.
Point the bullets the other way. It's so good. Yeah, it's right. Well, it's right after the scene with the dead Nazis pretending to be dead.
Yep.
It is. Yeah, it's so good. I mean, it's this moment of levity actually in all of this, because they're like trying to they're like, what's the French word for push? And they're like, oh, poussé. And of course, they do not pronounce it.
No,
poussé.
They're all like pussy, and he's like, no,
you can't say that. What are you talking about? Oh,
but
God,
it's really meaningful that it's during that sequence, or it's at the aftermath of that sequence, during all the sort of weird chaos where our sort of anti-hero guy slips away.
Yes.
Which is not what you're expecting to happen, and it's not where you'd expect it to happen, but it makes a lot of sense, and it really sets Big Red One apart, truly, because all these weird anecdotes, they're based on real weird things that happen. Obviously they're narratively heightened versions of things that happened, but they're so odd. It's such an odd collection of scenes and moments, and even some of the battle stuff, and yet the film never, I don't know what it said. Like, the only flaw really I have with Saving Private Ryan is it has all these moments of like physical irony that it just keeps pounding on you. And I always thought, you don't need to do that. This stuff can just be what it is, and we can just experience it. And Big Red One's amazing because it's got tons of humor and lots of weird, unexpected stuff. And yet it doesn't really play anything with weird irony. Even the bad guys, ostensibly the bad guy, getting away is like, everyone, if you're a viewer, at least me, even as a kid, I'm totally like at peace with it. And that's different. It makes you feel different things about war, which is really kind of amazing. And yet the template is totally, here's the, you just switch, jump through time. But like Joel said, a bunch of different missions. Here's the objective. Go fulfill the thing. Now it's on to the next thing. And they don't really start arguing with each other about philosophy and stuff till the very end. But even that's powerful. And it's better earned in the longer version. I agree with Joel.
Yeah. Richard Schickel, I want to make sure I give him the credit. He's the guy who headed up finding all of this stuff and reconstructing.
Bogdanovich too, who I'm pretty hard on, brought a lot of expertise to patching it together as well.
He apparently was the, in the article that I read about it, he's the one who like really was the guy who was like, this is how I interpret what Fuller's notes are saying in the shooting script. I'm trying to find the slide at the top of the movie that actually kind of filled me with dread. It was like, this is a fictional. Oh, I got to find it the exact one, the exact wording.
You jumped to that. Let me jump back really quick to the comment you were making, Ryan, about the bad guy essentially in the film gets away, and
I hate to call him the bad guy because I don't think, but
you get what you like. He's a representation until the end of the film. He's a representation of the German army, right? Of the Nazi German army.
Yeah.
And
the warmer act anyway.
And I think what made that acceptable, like at least for me as a kid, and even when I rewatched it, was the sense that he's running away into the sunset. And the voiceover right after it says, from that moment on, we had the German army on the run. You get this sense that, like, you already know what happens in history. You know they lose. So you're like, okay, he's never going to get away. Like, he runs, but he never gets away.
Right. The opening title card comes up just on the black screen. This is fictional life based on factual death. and I was just like, oh no, that's but then from that point on, it's spectacular. But I was like,
suggested for mature viewers only.
Yeah. Based on factual death. So talking about German characters, and learning the stories of the Germans, as Brian mentioned earlier, that was something that you brought up, is that you're also interested in the other side's story. The German, in this case, the stories from the Axis powers, and that and that's that's Cross of Iron, 1977's Cross of Iron. Which is a story. It's James Coburn again. James Coburn. James. Oh, I'm sorry, not James Coburn.
It's James Coburn, but it's not.
It's James Coburn, not James Coburn again. Sorry. Anyway, I got ahead of myself there. Tells you the order I watch these things in. And Maximilian Schell. Now I can say Maximilian Schell again because we talked about Maximilian Schell last week.
Yeah, and War Games last week. We're really repeating ourselves. This is. I said this before we did the show, so I'll say it again for the record. But we were talking about World War II movies, and Brian brought this list of World War II movies, and they were all too good for this particular episode. I don't know how else to put it. They were like the really, really good ones. The Longest Day. I don't remember some of the ones that were on there. Bridge over the River Kwai. Yeah. And those are all obviously worthy of discussion, but I all felt a little. They just felt a little too like, this is a real war movie. This is really about the heroism and the horror of war, whereas what we were trying to get to were these more intimate stories, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. But the one on his list that jumped out at me, it was unlike any other one that we brought up, and yet I think to some degree really fits the template was Cross Iron, which I knew, but at that point I hadn't even seen. This is the only one of this of this group of films that I didn't grow up with. I had this over on my shelf. It's Sam Peckinpah, so I assumed there would be a certain insanity and madness to it and randomness to it because all of his films sort of have that. So I kind of avoided it because I was like, I don't know, I want to see, like The Wild Bunch, or I don't want to have all the violence or all the whatever. Like, I just assume there's going to be some sort of negativity with this film, which there is, but it's different than what you expect. And I'll let Brian take over and kind of just set the thing up for us because
I'll get before Brian takes over. I'll just give the little one sentence synopsis on the movie. This is German Commander Hauptmann Stransky places a squad in extreme danger after Sergeant Rolf Steiner refuses to lie for him.
Oh, yes.
So that sort of sets it all up.
Yep.
Even though that's a great setup, but even though that's like it's not a small part of the movie, it's a big important part of the movie, but it's a limited part of the movie right in the middle of the movie. That's neither the beginning of the movie or the end of the movie, which I think is sort of interesting too. It's hard to take Cross of Iron and simply give it a 2-sentence thing that sums it up because there's that crazy Peckinpah randomness and weird structure to it that you kind of don't know what's coming next, and one thing doesn't always lead to another, even though things do tend to connect eventually. So go ahead, Brian.
They do. This is Peckinpah's only war film.
Yep.
And the only film he ever shot where everybody's in a uniform. Most of them were all. It's set in a Western, or it's set in an area where everybody's dressed differently, and conflicts, or even though it might be ultra violent or might have violence and sexual assault, he's not had violence on a scale where it was like, here's a war and it's constantly going. And that's one of the things that when you watch Cross of Iron, you're just getting barraged. From the opening scene, but even the credits when they begin to roll is just war footage from World War II, all the way to the end. There is somebody getting bombed at every second of the way, it's not. At times you think, okay, the war should be the background of that film, and he really sets it as the forefront of the film, and then sets the survival of that group led by Coburn and his conflict with Stransky. Steiner's conflict with Stransky the whole way and to the end, where you get this. Each one of those men has a different driving force for why they are who they are, but they do belong to a very horrible group of individuals, right? The Nazi army was a horrible, horrible group of individuals, and the Soviets aren't really. They're not centered front and center, and they're not being shown as anybody being.
No, they're faceless almost. Yeah, they're everywhere, faceless. But they're not characters really in the thing. The film's about struggle in life philosophy and military philosophy and everything else. And frankly, it's a class war too, to a certain degree, between these two Germans and the people in their immediate vicinity.
Yep, Stransky being that upperclassman or upper class society from Prussia, and
who I just say one last thing about him, Maximilian Schell's character. If he didn't want to be at the front, he wouldn't be there.
Correct.
You get very much the sense of that. He's there to get the Cross of Iron. He's there to get the highest military award, so that, and he has this whole vision for what his future life's going to be. He's a total aristocrat in that way. He's here to earn his stripes. He wants to do it and then get out of Dodge. Whereas Coburn's character is this lifer in the military who's only risen in the ranks about as far as he's going to rise, which is not very far.
Yep.
But there's a soulfulness to Colburn's character that I found surprising, that I thought was very, very cool. And yet there's a harshness to him as well, I think, that is inescapable.
There's the harshness, like throughout the film, the harshness is really driven towards those people he believes are lacking some sort of humanity.
Right.
Like Stransky does not see him as a human being. He sees him as an aristocrat that's just throwing bodies into the war for whatever, purpose there is. And even the guy, I'm trying to remember the character's name, the one who came along who was later like either a Gestapo or SS officer or something that had come and joined their ranks. When that guy goes to and sexually assaults the Russian woman who ends up castrating him, Steiner has literal sympathy for this guy. Like, doesn't even shoot him to death. He just gives him to the Russians to kill. He's like, here, and he says, now we're even. And he walks out of the room. Because to him, that guy didn't even rate as a human being. But everybody, other people that he encounters during the film, his own men in his squad, the Soviet boy that they kidnapped or they captured and then later set free, he ranks those.
Yeah, he technically kidnaps the boy from the other Germans to spare his life, essentially. Which is an interesting action on his part.
Yeah, and he does it from Stransky, because Stransky's the one who orders the kid be shot.
Right. Just in case.
Just in case you need other reasons to hate, Stransky in this film.
Well, but I mean, that's even that we see that actually repeated. There's coming up in one of these films, there's a horrific execution of somebody that just feels 98% unnecessary in terms of getting the mission done, and yet that 2% niggles at somebody enough that they're just like, well, he might reveal our position. I mean, who knows? We gotta get rid of him. And that inhuman decision is harsh. And Colburn's character does. I'm started using the actors' names because it's easier for me to keep track of them. But he just refuses to go with that. And yet, without spoiling it specifically, that tragedy still finds a way into every single one of these situations, no matter how much you try which is the harshness of war, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what Peckinpah was trying to get across with the film, was that, war is a terrible, terrible thing. And here, even inside of it, there are those who struggle for, against ideology, against class, against structure, and to maintain some sort of humanity and the horror of everything that's going on. The unfortunate part is that critics just lambasted the film when it came out in 1977. And
well, it feels like a 1967 movie. It does, when you're watching it, it does not feel like a 1977 movie at all. In a way, Big Red One does sort of feel like a 79, 80 type of production. This film feels like it's out of time. It's a British, kind of British film production. It's mostly paid for by United Kingdom funds, which ran out with several days of shooting to go. And it was an independent movie. So in this case, there's no Lorimar or certainly no Warner Brothers to go to and say, help us. We just have a couple of days left. When the money ran out from these private English investors, the money was gone. And that's the reason, although the ending is haunting and I think works, it really does feel like the film stops at this strange non sequitur, and then Peckinpah, being an artist, stretches that out and turns that into something more than maybe what it was supposed to be, so that he could have an ending to his film that wasn't the big action bonanza that they had planned.
Yeah, it does feel like when you're watching it, you're just like, okay, the film ended, like where it ended and you get the sense that these two men are still going to be in conflict for a little bit longer, but you do see where their roles have reversed, like the class of elitism versus the working man, where now the working man is the one in charge. Because
now you're actually in the war, mate.
Yeah, he's in the
Deal
war.
with it. I mean, that's a really interesting turn in the story, I think. And again, I don't want to completely spoil all the details of it because it is the end of the movie, but their tables totally turn. Because I've been here before many times, and you're going to experience what this is for the first, and probably we don't get the evidence of it, but probably the last time. And that's harsh. And it goes along with Colburn's character's sense of justice, which we see different examples of throughout the film. And so you don't really need the big ending where you see everything resolved. It really does work to just leave them there, because it's that decision that the film turns on more than the outcome of that decision, which we can all imagine. Although I will say that the laughter, like continuing through the ending credits,
that's a little spooky.
As
you said, you saw this. You just watched this film for the first time.
I mean, I hadn't seen this film. I was quite old when I first saw this film. I was having an off-the-cuff conversation with someone, and I said, there aren't many German films. There aren't many films made by Americans or British that actually tell the German side of the story. And I said, the closest I've seen is Das Boot, which I know isn't an English or an American film. And then a friend of mine said, but you clearly haven't seen Cross of Iron. I thought, no, I haven't. So I was about 21 when I first saw this film, and then I didn't see it again until 3 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
But rewatching it, one of the way I think about how nicely acted this film is, there's a scene when they're all in a bunker and they're getting shelled, and they're having this conversation about the captain and one of the lieutenants, and there's a lieutenant there, and now James Colburn is there, and he said, if your testimony is right and you're sticking to it, then I have to start a review board. And there's shells going off and there's dust falling down, and I think everyone's trying to out-psych each other again. I'm not scared.
Yeah.
And James Coburn just walks around and sits down and says kind of like, whatever. But then I think it's a colonel says to him, look, I've been covering your ass for years. What the hell's the matter with you? This is your big chance for what you want.
Is that James Mason's character that says that to him?
Yeah.
And he doesn't say anything. It's like he's kind of got, do what you want, man. I hate all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why you're sergeant for life, man. Yeah. But that's probably what you should be.
But that just stuck in my mind, because every time something went off, and you notice some poor bastard on the set shaking dust down, going, everyone's just going, you can see everyone's eyes just look up and then look at each other.
Mm-hmm.
That was brilliant.
It's really
good. It's one of those, it's a rising tension thing. It just totally plays off that which is one of the taglines of this thing. I just saw it. It's not where is it? There was taglines. Oh my gosh, this is so not going to be worth it now. Because one of them was, the power of Peckinpah has never been so real or so brilliant. But no, this one, on the Eastern Front in 1943, the German soldiers no longer had any ideals. They were not fighting for the stinking party, but for their stinking lives.
This film's it's got some amazing stuff, and it's got a homosexual character in it that's stunning for the time. It's got and to follow along with what Brian was saying, the film was the Cross of Iron was most successful in Central Europe markets, including Germany. That's where it did its best business and sort of made its investors, at least their break-even money back. Yeah. And because it's from a renowned filmmaker that's very much a auteur of his era, it has, I think it has a sort of outsized reputation for what it is, but it's you can't deny even though it's really, really heightened. Maximilian Schell, I can't say enough about him. It's one of James Coburn's favorite films that he ever did.
Yep.
He spent his whole rest of his life talking about how great it was. All of that helped bring it out of that sort of critical doldrums that it was in, whatever, the 4 weeks after Star Wars that it came out in the theater
totally
or whatever.
Overshadowed.
Yeah. I mean, that movie, all these 70s movies, The Sorcerer, there were a whole bunch of them that came out in the wake of Star Wars that played in the theater for a week, and then the theater promptly put Star Wars back in the theater to get the kids back.
Well, I mean, for its time too, it's an interesting film because there are more films than not that portray women as needing to be rescued, but the women in this film are actually quite freaking frightening.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's
those Russian women. Capable. I mean, if you look into the history of it, some of the Russia's most deadly fighting forces were women. They had this Black Widow squadron that had the biggest kill rate in the whole Russian Air Force, and they had a Russian infantry unit made out of women that the Germans were scared of.
Yeah.
So to see this film about these women who were captured, who played the Germans, they
have it both ways, because they are damsels in a way, but they just aren't. When the chips are down, they absolutely aren't, and that's a nice reversal from what we're used to experiencing. I totally agree.
That's right, kids. Black Widow in the Marvel Universe is real.
Based on out of history, baby.
Yep. Well, speaking of women in wartime, the next up is Operation Crossbow from 1965, with Sophia Loren and my favorite Girl Scout cookie, Duncan Sandys. No, Operation Crossbow. This was one this is one of yours, Maz. This one and where eagles dare, which is I
sort of forced Maz to choose Where Eagles Dare, but the one he brought up on his own was Operation Crossbow, and I was like, yes, that's the kind of movie I'm talking about. That's exactly the kind of movie. And both of these are, although tonally they're very different, they're both this kind of behind enemy lines, sneaking around, and truly like in the case of Operation Crossbow, it's. I was reading like a user review online on IMDb, and he said this is maybe the best "Let's go blow the thing up" World War II movie out there. And I'm like, yes, the "Let's go blow the thing up."
Yeah, that's what this is. They're trying to infiltrate the Nazis' rocket research site, and it's got Trevor Howard and George Papard. Who loves it when a plan
comes? It's Papard's movie, even though Sophia Loren's top billing.
Yeah, Sophia Loren's top billing.
It's
Sophia
Papard
Loren
at his most serious and his most sort of like down to business. I really enjoy him a lot in this film.
I like him in this film. I really do. His character it's really interesting because when you first meet him, he's, you pay attention to the movie. He's, it starts with them trying to work out the V1 rocket.
Right.
And of course, for damsels in distress, they have a female pilot who works out what's wrong with the thing and crash lands the thing, didn't even break into a sweat. So they give her a medal. She goes, here, what's next? Bring it. So they decide to send in, they have to find a load of men who can speak German and are engineers.
Right.
So they put this call out, and of course, George Peppard comes in, and he's an American fighter pilot whose dad's a millionaire industrialist. He's got a master's degree from MIT, and he's just happy the war started because he's a playboy and he's bored.
He's as stuffed shirt as you're likely to see in a movie like that.
He even gets asked in the interview, well, didn't you go and work for your father? And he goes, oh, good God, what for? So they pick him for this mission. They train him as a commando, and they dump him behind enemy lines, and he's just fantastic. He grows up, really. I think he really grows up in this film. And when he meets, the person who's,
Yeah, you can say he's impersonating a German, and Sophia Loren plays the person he's impersonating's wife, who shows up in his life to take custody of their kid.
So she's divorcing him because he's a collaborator, her husband.
Right, yeah.
She doesn't know his actual husband's dead.
Right.
So in all this mess, George Peppard, to me, he wants to be the cowboy in the white hat. You know, he's the American in this predominantly British film, and he just wants to be the hero. So he thinks of this plan on the run. All right, you think I'm your husband, you want a divorce, you want to take the kids, you need your husband for a signature, you know I'm not who I am. Tell you what, I'll sign this bit of paper so you can take your kids away. I'll date it today so this badass woman who's a spy who's running the motel won't kill.
Who plays that? What her name? Like that actor? She's amazing in it. The other woman.
Yeah. I don't know what her name is.
Joel,
I'll find it. I'll find it.
She is brilliant.
Let's see. I think it's Lily Palmer.
It is Lily Palmer, and she doesn't do a lot of talking, but everything that's going on with her is in the eyes. It's really, really great.
Yes. So after he leaves, and you can tell he's going off with a spring in his step, going, "I've just saved a beautiful woman's life," and he's getting on. He goes, "Now let's blow something up that's German."
Yep, exactly.
And unbeknownst to him, this woman comes in and just shoots her.
Soon as he's out, just as he's down the road a little bit,
and then these guys comes in with a.
That's a big spoiler for the movie because, like I say, Sophia is top rated in the film, and since we've spoiled it, she's only really in it for about 21 minutes or so. Yeah. But it goes along with Cross of Iron and some of the other things we've talked about, where he works it all out for her. He kind of stays there and works out this plan where there's no reason, she's no threat to anybody. We just need the timing to work out here and everything will be fine. And Palmer's just like, no, I'm not. She's the character who's not prepared to live. And it's great that it's another woman who you can tell is against this the whole time.
Yeah.
Who just is like, I'm not prepared to live with that 2% that this chick could mess up what we're doing here.
And you can
in a ruthless assassination, like second only to Hand That Rocks the Cradle in terms of woman killing woman violence.
Yes.
You
can tell in this film that this woman, she says, all right, you brash little American, you can have your white hat moment, but I know she has to die. So you go off. I'll finish. I'll do what you should have done.
And then let the adults take care of the rest of this.
I'll
truly,
clean it up.
Yeah.
But then he goes on to, he does the ultimate sacrifice in the end. But the other thing about this movie that I love is the guy. He's an English guy, and I can't remember his name. The guy that plays the Dutch petty officer in the Navy. His character that he's trying to be is actually wanted for murder.
Yes.
And then of course you've got the double agent who was trying to get picked for this mission in the first place is actually, and he recognizes him. And this dude won't come out of character to admit he's involved in a mission to destroy the V1 rocket, and they shoot him for murder. Mm-hmm. And he just doesn't come out of character all the way during the film.
That's my favorite performance in the whole movie. It's that guy, and I can't remember.
Tom Courtenay.
Tom Courtenay, one of the great all-time British character actors.
Yes.
And that character was built for this quirky individualism that he brings to each of the people he plays throughout his career. I adore Tom Courtenay, and
Sir Tom Courtenay.
Amen.
Because he earns that.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and the Germans. It's funny because what Matt's describing is comical. It's a comedy of errors in a certain amount, in many, many ways, and yet none of these actors are allowed to wink or do really anything. Like even Peppard, who could have probably gotten away with that, doesn't do it. When Jeremy Kemp shows up, when the Germans who ended up being foisted on their own petard to a certain degree are all playing this very straight and seem very confident, and that really. That competence and that the fact that they're smart and that they're mostly figuring this out just maybe a second too late. They really do figure it out in time. It takes the ultimate sacrifice for the mission to ultimately succeed. Our hero doesn't come back with all the secrets of the rocket.
No,
but he does. Spoiler alert: he does blow the thing up, man. He destroys the program in spectacular fashion.
And Anthony Quayle, when he gives that guy a cigarette and he thanks him in German, it's just
pretty classy.
It's just very classy. And I like, as an academic, I love Trevor Howard in this movie because he's a complete tool.
Yeah.
He's wrong. He goes, oh, it's a barrage balloon. No, actually, it's a 70-foot torpedo. Really?
Yeah, he's got the whole speech about how, and there's no chance that this could ever reach our shores or whatever. And then
they'll have to use solid propellants. And then in the film, George Papal goes, "What do you fuel it with? Liquid oxygen." He goes, "Oh, really? What a great idea!" That's pretty like that stuff, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. The whole thing, at least back at headquarters where they're trying to plan this stuff, the whole thing feels like that scene in Bridge Over River Kwai, where William Holden's basically getting blackmailed into going back into war, where you've got this arrogant, although Holden plays it pretty straight, you got this arrogant guy, and the Brits just badger him until he volunteers, and then after that, it's all jolly good, excellent, Mm-hmm. I adore that moment, and I love Trevor Howard in this too, because he doesn't play the guy like a doofus. Everything he says comes from this place of integrity, and he's just wrong about everything.
Scientists right there. I was trained as scientists. We don't make leaps. In other words, you have no idea what you're talking about.
You have no imagination is the problem. And Germans, in the case of these rockets, had a lot more than they did, and I love Operation Crossbow. It's really, really great. I came to it very, very late. I didn't grow up with that one, but it was this journey back in time to that kind of storytelling that I really, really missed. And it's very clever and very smart film. So
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say the one note that I had on this film was that historically, Werner von Braun was the inventor of the V2 rocket. He's nowhere in the film.
Yeah, that's true.
At the time, he's winning accolades for being director at NASA. And the rocket
I think
program
they were trying to keep that one quiet. We got to the moon thanks to a Nazi.
Exactly. And an SS officer at that, right? Like the most terrible of the Nazis.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'll just say again, I've watched a dozen movies now, and this was one of them where I'm like, whoa, who is this guy? And even now, I couldn't remember his name. And the answer, every time, was Tom Courtenay. And I'm like, holy Moses, what a good actor.
Yep.
That's funny. He's so good that you feel like you know him, but you don't really recognize him in these weird little roles. I mean, outstanding.
Yeah. Tom Courtenay is not, and that is Clint Eastwood. And Clint Eastwood
as far as sidekicks go, they're the yin and yang of the human race, aren't they?
And he does play a good sidekick.
Yep. So that brings us to our next one, Where Eagles Dare. Another mission. This one isn't to blow up the V2 and V1 rocket sites. This one is to rescue American Brigadier General George Carnaby.
Which actually, not to be a spoiler alert, is actually not the mission at all.
It is not the mission.
That's the mission.
Here's the IMDb tag on it is: Allied agents stage a daring raid on a castle where the Nazis are holding American Brigadier General George Carnaby prisoner. But that's not all that's really going on.
Although this is an idiotic idea, it's a castle that's only accessible by cable car.
Yeah.
I don't know who built that castle, only accessible by cable car back in the age of castles being built. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But man, for awesome cable car footage, this film cannot be beat. And
Alistair McLean clearly loved himself a cable car.
He liked the cable cars,
one of the things about this movie, and I'll jump to the end before I just talk about how great this film is. It's a very British film. It has the longest escape scene of any movie ever.
Yeah. The whole second half of the movie almost.
Right. Mm-hmm. We've done everything we want. Let's get out of here. 40 minutes later.
That's
in real movie time. It takes them freaking 40 minutes to get to the airfield.
It also has the distinction of Clint Eastwood, who's this American sent along on this mission, he's clearly a badass soldier. He proves that throughout the movie. But the real reason he was chosen is because he's completely ignorant of everything that's going on in the story. That's why the American is allowed to come along in this case. And it proves useful. His ignorance literally works during this sort of weird, twisted master plan. If you know Alistair McLean at all, and all we're going to talk about from here to the end of the show is Alistair McLean.
Yeah.
There's
interesting thing about that Eastwood character.
There's always a traitorous turncoat, and they will be revealed at basically the same point in the, and sometimes there's two, and sometimes there's three traitorous turncoats. This film, without revealing either of them specifically, there are more than one, and I'll just say some other stats about it that are crazy before we get into the substance of it, because it's this gorgeous movie. It's shot by Brian G. Hutton, who's not known for shooting things gorgeously. I just think the action, the cable cars, the up in the Alps, the castle, it's like you can't point the camera anywhere and not capture something amazing. And I think that just served the story, the locations, everything they chose, because it's all shot on location. There are very, very few sets in this film. They really did shoot inside this castle, and it really does make a difference. But just some stats. This is the film that has the highest body count for Clint Eastwood. He kills more than 30 people in this movie.
Yep.
So even though the character kills nobody in the book, so it's a departure from McLean a little bit. He just keeps shooting, man. His gun is one of those that never runs out of bullets and just keeps shooting Germans. It also has a reputation, although this isn't true. Maz, you can back me up on this, but every speaking German character in the movie dies at some point, and none of our heroes are actually killed by Germans. They all die in other weird happenstances. So the Germans in this film are truly like the stormtroopers in Star Wars. They cannot hit the broadside of the barn. They can't really do anything competently or usefully. They're entertaining when they're talking around the table and stuff. So I don't that German, when he takes that female operative out on that weird twisted SS date that he takes her, that he cajoles her into, is fantastic. So some fun characters, but they're all, compared to what we've been talking to up until this point, they're all mustache twirling villains that need to be dispatched, and are accordingly. But that's, Steven Spielberg says this is his favorite World War II movie because I want to use his words correctly, because of the boy's own unreality of it all, I believe is the term he used, which I had to unpack a little bit to understand. But it's basically what he's saying is it's a fantasy. It's a war fantasy, and it satisfies all of your fantastical desires that you want from such a thing. And we haven't even mentioned Richard Burton yet, Mass.
So you watch this film, and if you can't see it, you can't see it once. You got to watch it 3 or 4 times to actually get what actually is going on, and who's a double agent, who might be a triple agent, who
it helps to read the Wikipedia page after you watched it for the first time.
Who might just be an agent. So
Clint Eastwood called this movie Where Doubles Dare.
Yeah, lots of great stunt doubles work in it, no doubt.
I like the film right from the start. So, the beautiful scene of this vintage German plane coming through the Alps at night.
During the credits,
And they put the red light on to get ready to jump out. And of course, there's a flashback when they're in this bunker and they're talking about the mission. And there's very stoic British men sort of sitting there lounging around with these superior officers. And they're going, oh, okay. Well, we've never worked together before, but we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And then Clint Eastwood is there, just standing there, just confused.
Right.
But he just has this confused look on his face, and he introduced him as, an American Army Ranger. So, that his reputation speaks for himself, and that's all they say about him. And he's just sitting there, standing there, going, "Yeah, why am I here?"
Yeah.
And as the film progresses, and there's even a scene in the film where before the men do anything meaningful, Mary Yore comes out of the plane when everyone jumps out, and she jumps out of the plane, and you think, well, what's going on here? So Richard Burton meets up with her.
Yeah, I don't understand it. Was she in the plane or hiding up in the plane?
She was in the back of the plane.
Okay.
When everyone jumped out, they let her jump out last, and Richard Burton forgot the code book when he gets the radio of the first dead person who wasn't killed by a German. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Then who did? Somebody in our crew? Somebody
in the crew
knew where we were landing? How could they know? It's
So, his neck was broken.
Yeah.
So he explains to her, even as right in the start of the movie, that, George Carnaby isn't George Carnaby, and the hole was, the plane didn't crash. It landed. It was riddled with bullets, but they weren't German bullets. They were British bullets, but a hole is a hole is a hole. So you immediately think, what's going on here? So it progresses. Someone else dies when they get to just before they get themselves arrested. He tells Clint Eastwood exactly what's going on. And the scene, he goes, right, and he starts to talk to him, and then the camera pans out and you can't hear them speak anymore. It took me a long time rewatching that film to get that bit. There. He's actually letting them into the fact that you're not here because for what you actually think you're
letting him into it, but not letting us into it. It's clever.
At all.
Yeah.
So everyone gets arrested. It turns out that the 3 surviving people are actually the double agents. And, Richard Burton plays this yarn to put a phone into headquarters because he might actually be. Is he a double agent or is he actually just a spy?
Right.
Yeah.
You got to find out. Burton.
And there's an off-the-shoot comment about the colonel, the guy who sent them on this mission.
Mm-hmm.
He says, well, he was in Hitler's circular staff for a year and a half before we got him back. And you think, was he? was he turned? Was he always a spy? Was actually, did we get back the same person we sent? You don't really know.
Another group of commandos chosen because they speak perfect German, even though even the Germans don't speak German in this movie. They're all British people.
Well, that's the lovely way in filmmaking to cover up the fact that you got no one who can speak German. You don't want to put subtitles on.
But it's not a believable conceit, that you send a bunch of these guys and that they can just walk into a tavern in town and that everyone will accept that they're German just because they speak such perfect German. It's the idea of that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Even if you did, I mean, the amount of work it takes and training it would take to get to the point that you could pass as a German amongst Germans is different than just being able to speak or understand the language.
I mean, I would actually, if you're absolutely right, and I would send everyone to watch Inglourious Bastards just for how they all got found out, just by however you say 3.
Right. Yes. And that's right. Yeah. Well, and in that we believe the guy is awesome, and yet he's still one little slip up like that, and it's over. Yeah. Inglourious Bastards, very inspired by this particular film. At least that part of it, the Michael Fassbender, what's the woman's name? I can't remember her name. She's actually German.
Yes. Treasure Hunt with
National Treasure. She's I really like
Diane Kruger.
So that section of the movie is very much this sort of sneaking around style film, and it follows a lot of the same beats. Burton was, like he was his whole adult life. He was sick. He was drinking. Somebody observed. I can't remember. One of the women was dating Robert Shaw at the time, and he visited the set. And then all the alcoholics descended upon this film set. Peter O'Toole, Richard Harris, and they all disappeared for 3 days while they were making it. And no one knew where they went. And Burton is literally in every scene in the film. Eastwood maybe could have snuck away for a couple of days. Burton can't. And then they found him, and he dried out, and he went back to work. What were they going to do? It was a different era. Think about TMZ and what we'd be hearing about if any of this happened. Remember when Lindsay Lohan was late for work one day to the movie she was doing with whoever, and it was that was all we talked about for 3 weeks, or it's crazy to me that happened, but it's funny. And it's really funny that wherever they were shooting this castle, that all these English alcoholics descended upon them and basically kidnapped him like it was the night before his wedding.
What I love about this film is when it finally ended, when they got to the plane, and the colonel's there, and miraculously the admiral took out the firing pin from his gun so he could shoot.
You're totally spoiling the end of the movie, though. You shouldn't do that. Unless you have a really important point to make.
I do have a very important point to make.
All right, try and make it without ruining everything.
When Richard Burton says to
although this film's so convoluted, even if we tell you and reenact the last scene for you,
you'll have to watch it again.
When you go back and watch it, you'll forget what we talked about.
It's also hard to say spoiler. Spoilers for a movie that was released in '68.
Spoilers are always appropriate.
This film's older than I am, so yeah.
Longer than us, older than us all.
Yeah. So
go ahead though. I'm sorry. I just want to say this is the whole shebang.
Gets find out, and he goes, "Yes, you are the traitor." And he goes, "Oh, well, we've got to." He said, "What are you going to do now? Kill me?" And Richard Burton actually says in this movie, "No, I don't want to treat the hangman." The next line in the film is this guy who's just been outed as a spy going, "Here's the alternative if you want it," and he jumps out of the plane. What happened to "I don't want to cheat the hangman"?
Yeah.
And then, Clint Eastwood shuts the door, sits down, and the last line of the film is, Major, next time, keep this a strictly British affair, will you?
Eastwood, while they were making the film, kept asking to, I don't want to say this stuff. Can't Burton just say this? Less talking for me. He had to carry a lot of the weight in the final scenes because there's a fantastic scene where they're ascending up the castle. After they've come up on the cable car, they've still got to climb this rope about 3 stories up into the window where their Rapunzel-like agent sends this rope down to them. And Burton Burton's got cables on him and stuff, and he's just flying up the rope. And Eastwood doesn't have cables on him, no assistant. He actually is doing the stunt. And the movie plays it as a bit where it's harder for this guy, the American, to climb up this thing. And he's all exhausted and needs help coming through the window at the end. And you just are like, no way. But again, it's the fantasy of it that's important, Eastwood struggles to get up the wall, give our 2 undercover agents time to have a nice conversation with each other, which keeps moving stuff along. It's got some incredible action in it. It's really, really scenic and amazing. And
well, you are right, Ryan. When the Germans don't kill any of these guys, Richard Burton sends one of the spies out down the rope so the Germans would shoot him, thinking they've all gone down the rope, and then he blows the other 2 up.
Yes,
sticks dynamite in a cable car.
Right,
none of them get shot by Germans.
That's right. The Germans accomplish nothing in this. They literally lose 100% of the time. It's like a CSI Miami episode in that way. Nobody gets away with anything.
And the entire film, Eastwood asks the question, why am I here? What am I doing? And it makes me laugh every time Richard Burton leans into him in the bar and he's finally going to tell him what he's here for. And I just imagine the conversation goes something like this. I'm going to find out who these spies are because I'm British. And then I need you to shoot everybody so that we can escape.
Every single person we come across.
All the peoples. You need to use all the bullets.
Well, and the woman too. She gets lots of shots in and throws a few grenades as well. They're really the action heroes of the thing. It's super funny, and Eastwood and Burton got on really well when making the movie, and that comes across in the movie, which helps. Yeah, and Maz, just to put a capper on this, not only does he find out who the spies are, he gets a list of every single spy in the war effort, just to make sure it's a total fantasy. He comes back to headquarters with here they all are in ranked order of importance.
I'm so good. I'm going to trick the spies into revealing the other spies.
We ruined that movie, but the details are weird, and they're not really the point of the thing.
I just watched this film about 3 weeks ago, and there's when he's got everyone around the table, he asks the woman who's actually explained as a nurse to give the general truth serum. He says, "Can you go and get a pencil and some paper?" And she just magically apparates back with pencil and paper. I think, my students don't come to an exam with a pencil. Where the hell did she go in this castle?
The pins are lined up really, really.
Like writing, like they're taking an exam. They're writing these little books. Where did that come from?
That is spectacular.
It's really, really super entertaining.
Where Eagles Dare is the second of Alistair MacLean's World War II.
His book actually has a much cooler name. Although Where Eagles Dare is not bad. It's Shakespeare, so I can't really knock.
Yeah. Let me. I can find out for you. It is based on. Well, I thought that would be easier to find. Hold on a second.
It probably isn't. It's a much more famous movie than a book now. It's not. Alistair MacLean was a great author, wrote some really entertaining stuff, but he didn't exactly transfer equally to each successive generation. It's the movies that help it, particularly the upcoming one here that we're about to talk about, which is really one of his best novels and certainly one of the prestige pictures made from one of his novels.
Yes it is.
Yeah, which is, Joel, I'll let you say what the next movie is.
Sorry, I was looking at originally it was going to be called Castle of Eagles, but I cannot find here what
maybe that's the name of the novel. Could be.
I don't know. All right, so so next one, and then so we go from getting at a high a castle atop a mountain to a Greek island filled with guns. Two giant guns, I guess, and that is the guns of Navarone.
Two super powerful radio operated guns that are ruling the Mediterranean, and no ships can get through, and no caravans. What do they call caravan in the ocean? Convoy. Thank you. Yeah, sure, they can't get supplies through. So this mission feels small with only a handful of guys, like the rest of this missions, but it's super important.
There are 2,000 trapped British soldiers that need to be rescued, and they can't be rescued with these two big guns shooting everything that comes in the area.
When I was a kid, I had a Guns of Navarone playset. It was about 3 feet tall, and those little plastic, molded army guys, that had the little platforms built into them, it was populated with them. And then I had a little infantry unit that had to get into Navarone and climb up ladders and sneak around and do this. And so I had this legend in my head. I had already done the Guns of Navarone with my own imagination 70 times before I ever watched the movie. And then it was explained to me. I knew what Navarone was. I assumed it was a real thing. It's not. It's a complete made up thing. There was no such place. But I really wanted to watch the movie. And my reaction to the movie when I was a kid after playing with this playset was boring. It's just people talking, people riding a boat. Yeah, they climb a mountain, but then nothing happens. Then they hang out with a bunch of Greek people. Where the hell is the mountain and the army guys shooting at each other? There's not even any Germans in this, really. It was driving me absolutely bonkers. But my dad pulled me along because he kind of knew the big ending was coming and everything, and it would be worth it if we could get there, which it kind of was. But man, 3 hours long. I was like, what's this? Has an intermission in it? I've never seen that before. So all this idea of this was sort of foreign to me. But like I said at the beginning of the show, you grow up, and then even though you watch the movie and you haven't watched it again necessarily, the movie grows up with you. You remember what you watched and what you experienced in it, and you remember the interrogation scenes, and you remember leaving the guy behind on the top of the mountain. All these things that, as a kid, don't seem terribly exciting, like start to mean something to you as you mature. And no film. Well, I shouldn't say no film, but this is a film where that experience was absolutely true. Gregory Peck, and where they meet up with David Niven, I guess those kind of are the two main guys. The two Greek chicks were guys apparently in the novel. They turned them into women, which is brilliant. That was very, very smart. Irene Pappas, and Joel's gone, so I can't ask him to look it up. But another Greek woman. Both Greek actors, or both European actors anyway. Is Gregory Peck plays an English guy in this, doesn't he?
Yes.
And he does a pretty decent English accent. Like, he's a pretty good English actor.
Yeah, he does.
He plays a renowned mountain climber / commando guy who's brought back into service to head up this mission. Mallory, he's going to come up in our next movie too, which is kind of a sequel to this. And David Niven is a explosives expert guy, and the explosive experts in your behind the scenes military movie is always an eccentric, weird guy. And this is David Niven's been great in so many things, obviously throughout the ages. So I don't want to pinhole him, but he was a last minute replacement for a different actor, Kenneth Moore, I believe. And he super gets into this role of this strange munitions expert, anti-war philosopher poet that he plays. It's really unlike the other sort of stiff upper lip people we've seen David do throughout the years. And I adore that too. And I like the action. Richard Harris has a fun cameo at the beginning as a very
very interesting Australian accent. He doesn't even get a credit for in the movie, I don't think.
Yeah, well, he's credited. He's not credited at the beginning like he's a big star, but he's in the big list at the end. But it's weird to see him show up in this part where he really takes stage and then disappears from the rest of the film. He was a big enough guy at the time that it felt like somebody was doing him a favor. Like, here's your insurance, medical insurance for the year or something. It really is like weird, and yet it is awesome.
Yeah, he says bloody a lot, and it's awesome.
Yeah, right. That always works.
Gia Scala is the other woman.
Thank you, Gia Scala.
When he says, hey, it's that bloody overhang with the bloody thing, and you can't get a bloody bomb big enough to bloody, and then it hands back to the commanding officer. He goes, Squadron Leader Burton's Australian, sir, and everyone goes, oh. Oh, that explains everything.
So it is Alistair McLean, and it does have a lot of the fun in it than Where Eagles Dare has, but it's not just strictly fun. There's cultural stuff going on in this. These characters are more thoughtful about what they're doing. They're more conflicted about the nature of war itself, which is surprising in a film like this. But in the end, with all the double crosses and all the getting captured and escaping and getting captured again and escaping, it's about this final assault and this very, very clever booby trap that they place in this thing. It's very much like the end of Star Wars. It's this cross-cut. There's 3 different plots going on, 3 different mini missions within the main mission, plus an escape that has to happen, a much quicker escape. Naz, you'll appreciate that.
Yeah, I did like that one.
It's quicker. It's just this quick boat-related escape, but people's fates change hands several different times in different ways throughout that final sequence, which is great. And they blow the thing up. Again, spoiler, but there's very few cascading explosions in films that are like more satisfying than the one that happens at the end of this one. And it's great. And there's an amazing scene where there's a lot that happens in it. They out the traitor gets assassinated. I won't say how, but it follows a pattern from these other movies we've been talking about, which is really interesting because it's not, I guess it is a pattern in these types of movies, but it just feels unexpected compared to what you think, how you think things would go down. Niven's got this really powerful anti-war speech before they finally dive into the final mission. There's just a lot going on in it that it's a long, big epic. It's the earliest film on this list, I think 61.
Yeah.
So it has the grandeur of like a biblical epic of the era, but it's a military, World War II hero story. And I would say it's one of McLean's more clever stories. So it all works pretty well. I'll let you guys take over. What
I like about this film is the heroes.
Yeah.
They're not perfect.
No.
So you got Gregory Peck, who is, he's been undercover for a year and a half. He doesn't want to be there. The person he trusts in the world, person he trusts most in the world has told him he's going to kill him because he blames him for the death of his wife, he helped him bury his wife. So they got that going on.
Yeah, Anthony Quinn and Gregory Peck's characters are at even though they're on the same team, they're at loggerheads the whole time. They have a vendetta between them, literally.
Yeah. And Anthony Quayle is a hapless old friend of his who, as the film progresses, says, I just want people to play my games. And Gregory Peck says to him at some point, well, now you outrank us all. We got no choice. You're playing at war. Butcher Brown, the mechanic,
Yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, he said he got his training during the Spanish. So he murdered lots of people during the Spanish Civil War, and now he's one of the good guys. He got, what's his name? Bobby Darin? Is that the guy's name? That plays a Greek guy he was a singer at this point before he became an actor. But he was.
Is it Bobby Darin? Joel, back us up on that.
Oh my God, I did not track that. Hold on a second here.
Well, this guy could sing. That's just why he sings this song when they're at the wedding. He's actually a singer.
Right. That whole wedding scene
James
is amazing.
Darin. Yeah, James Darin.
And James Darin, he was in, was it Time Cop or Time Tunnel or something?
Yep, Time Tunnel. That's right.
And just to go totally off topic, so he saved Deep Space Nine when he came back as Vic Fontaine.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he got sent to America for an education and turned into a runner for a gang who murdered people in the streets. And then David Niven, an upper crust academic who wouldn't take a commission, and he managed to blow up Rummel's headquarters without blowing up the nuts. Which, if you think about it, is completely infeasible.
Right. But you listen to these characters; they're incredibly vivid, and that's what is awesome about the movie. Mm-hmm. That's what endures about the movie as it goes throughout the ages. I totally agree with that.
They're all messed up, and of course, and David Niven keeps pointing out, when they get on that really bad boat, which ultimately.
Well, it even has a really great, good German in it, right? The guy who's like, "Look, if you don't start, you guys." He's like, "You guys." I mean, this is not how he does it, but. You guys got to start telling me something. Otherwise, the SS is going to come in here and they're going to shoot you and they're going to shoot me and everything's going to go to hell. They're going to shoot everybody in town. Like this guy's he's like a middle management guy in the German army, just trying to keep corporate happy and out of his hair. It's really fantastic.
Guys, can you just get your TPS reports in, please? Get your stapler.
Michael Scott of the Wehrmacht.
Very much so. Yeah. Awesome. You feel for him. You really do. You're like, oh, poor dude.
I also want to just give a shout out to Olga Lehman, who's the costumer, especially for Anthony Quinn's awesome leathery and fur jacket thing. Yeah. Just. Man, I was like,
does anyone wear a scarf around their neck too? Do I remember that right throughout this? Like one of those tied up. Is that Anthony Quinn?
Yeah.
Not like a scarf, but like a bandana or something.
A kerchief.
Not to mention that the wedding scene, which isn't nothing really in the plot of the thing, is filled with 900 extras or something. It's shot in the town square. It's a big widescreen film that spares no expense, truly. And that's something that when you're watching it on TV in 1983 with your dad, when you see it now, there's a 4K disc. It's been fully restored. It's one of those films that just visually, it's a travel log and it looks kind of amazing on even on TV. So I like that about it too. But it was the big hit movie of which all of these sort of we're all kind of trying to be Guns of Navarone. I kind of feel about it. And, the next film, unless you got something, Brian, you want to add to Guns? The next film's just a cheapquel to it, like the Little Mermaid had a straight to video cheapquel.
Yeah,
that's what we used to call them anyway, cheapquels.
This is we got to see. This is very much. Well, there's got to be some other adventure we can send these guys on.
Well, Alistair MacLean wrote another novel.
Yeah.
And then for years they were just trying to make it, but it's for different reasons, rights reasons. These moguls growing old and running out of money. They had a couple bombs and suddenly you weren't a movie producer anymore. That was kind of the era. There was no corporate overlords that would come in and bail you out. It was different. So, if you made Fall of the Roman Empire and nobody showed up, suddenly you're just like, well, that's $40 million I don't have anymore. And I don't know what $40 million was back in the early 60s, but it was all the money in the world. I mean, you weren't making movies anymore, period. So long story short, it took all the way to the disco era before somebody said, hey, guys, let's do it. Let's do a sequel to Guns of Navarone with none of the same people and, just none of the same anything. Nevertheless, as it's easy to rip on this as a totally unsatisfying sequel, which is how it was received. This is more in line with the other movies we were talking about. It's out of its era a little bit, 1978, but it's a real guilty pleasure. It's directed by Guy Hamilton, who made all the worst Bond movies. Man with the Golden Gun, Live and Let Die, Diamonds Are Forever.
It does feel like a 70s Bond movie. And
it's full of 70s Bond people, right? Barbara Bach's in it, Richard Keel's in it. So it is very like a cheap Bond movie with no Bond in it. But it has Robert Shaw and Edward Fox, who are they are not Gregory Peck and David Niven. Okay, I'll grant you that, but they have a ton of fun together in this movie. They get along really well. Fox is at his charmingestly funniest in it. And in the Clint Eastwood role, they have Harrison Ford, and they couldn't have gotten a better wanting to do something different sort of Harrison Ford at this point in his career. He was desperate to not be
Han Solo,
Yeah, I mean, he'd just been Han Solo only the year before. This was the next movie he did, but he chose it specifically because it was full of these other people he knew, and because even though it was just kind of the same, it's kind of the same as Star Wars. It's a military mission movie, which is what the original Star Wars is.
Yeah.
Not to get into Star Wars, but if you really, the Star Wars movie that it really steal completely and wholeheartedly from these movies is Rogue One. Rogue One is a behind-the-scenes military mission movie with a small group of mercenaries who are all conflicted one way or another about what their role is in the greater war, and who all make the ultimate sacrifice to capture the thing that they need to get at the end, the MacGuffin, whatever it is. Yep. In Rogue One, it's the Death Star plans. That film, people talk about its adventure qualities, but it's completely a behind-the-scenes war mission film.
Fantastic.
And this is too, and this one's not very good, but it's very pleasurable. Franco Nero. It's one of the 5 movies that Harrison and Angus McGuinness did together. Joel, I remembered his name this time. Angus
McGuinness. Yep.
Angus McGuinness, a Canadian actor who was living in England, and all these movies shot in Europe and England that needed an American. Hired him. He's literally just him. John Ratzenberger was another one. They were contemporaries. They're literally in all these movies in the late 70s and early 80s for that reason, because they can talk and look like an authentic American, even though they're Canadian. If they were American, England wouldn't have let them come live there for union purposes. And they shouldn't, because we do the same in reverse. But Canadians, is all you really got to do is show up and say, hey, can I make movies here for a few years? And they'll say, sure. Same with Canada in reverse. Hey, I'm from England, or I'm from Scotland, but I want to be a Canadian now. Is that cool? Yeah, just sign here. They're very cool. It's us. We're the problem. But that aside, Harrison Ford and Carl Weathers, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, to me, that was, we're making a war film. We need an African American. Find one. And
find one. And find a reason for him to be in the movie as well.
And he's been arrested. That's not a problem. He's under guard by MPs when we see him, and he beats the crap out of 2 policemen and ends up on a mission.
And then he gets on the plane. It's clever. It's typical Alistair McLean. The people going on this mission are literally breaking into the airfield instead of going into it, because what does Robert Shaw said? Every one of our missions into this territory have been ruined here in Turkey. They've all gone bad before our heroes even got on the plane. So now we're not telling them that we're going. And that's clever. Although the other Europeans trying to play Americans are terrible, man. That plane, the interior of that plane before they start jumping out, those guys are, oh yeah, rah, rah, Americans talk like this, and it's just
you can call me Tex.
Exactly.
That's still really super enjoyable. Like I really, really like it. And spoiler alert: only a couple of those guys actually make it from the plane down to Czechoslovakia or wherever they are. I can't remember exactly, but they need to blow up a bridge, and the 2 British guys are along to assassinate turncoat traitor. And as the group gets whittled down to almost nothing, they managed to accomplish both missions, which is really, really fun. But it's stupid compared to something like Guns and Navarone. It just doesn't have the high-mindedness. It's Man with the Golden Gun. It's cheap racial jokes. There's a scene where Richard Kiel tries to get the black off of Carl Weathers' face. That's really makes you squirm when you're watching it. But Michael Byrne who's a great British actor, plays a fantastic German. He played a lot of Germans throughout the years. He's English, but he's got the look, you know. He was the main German bad guy in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, to make you realize who I'm talking about. He's great in it. Angus is good in it. I mean, Robert Shaw and Harrison Ford seem like they're getting along and having a good time. Barbara Bach never cracks a smile in it. She's all business. That's fun.
That's because she's married to Ringo Starr. She's got nothing to smile about.
Yeah, she's got nothing to be happy about.
She married the least known Beatle.
She's fun, and Franco Nero is always good. You know, you feel like he just has this sense of him when he shows up, where like he's coming in from some other movie where he was seducing some woman and betraying some rich guy. Like I like that when you can just show up and have a presence and have a thing going on. But it's corny and silly, but it's also exciting and fun. The big final assault on the Thing, I won't say what it is because I'll just keep that to myself. And the destruction that goes along with it, and all the wisecracks and stuff.
You know what? That's great. That's great. I watched. Sorry to interrupt you. I watched horribly inaccurate movie that I love, Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Quinn was about 9. No, Quinn was about 11. He watched this film with me.
Oh wow!
Because it's a dad thing, and I could tell he was trying to. Hey, I'm watching the movie with man. He was bored out of his skull.
Right.
So he started going, oh, look at that tank battle, very bad CGI. I said, dude, they're real tanks. They have to film a tank battle with real freaking tanks. So that scene at the end of the movie when they finally, I'm taking your lead of not saying exactly what happened.
Yeah. But there's miniatures involved and some other things, but they really had to do the stuff.
Brilliant miniatures. I mean, you know, to pull, that was good.
All-time great Bond miniature guy, and he worked in every movie. John Richardson does the effects for Force 10, and they're pretty fantastic. You can see some of the seams, but it beats like the end of Superman the movie, for example, from the same year, in terms of a lot of the time you really feel the weight of it, the power of it, the sound. So it's, you know, Guy Hamilton, as much as I rip on him because he just can't take anything seriously, and his films don't as a result. I'm the only one maybe in Bond history who thinks Goldfinger is just stupid, because it is stupid. And it sinks the Thing for me, even though it's all the baby boomers' favorite Bond movie. And it's fun, but it's way too stupid. I just can't. When he goes Operation Grand Slam, you know, 2 words, Mr. Bond, that mean nothing to you. Right. I mean, it's fun. I don't expect you to talk. I expect you to die. That's super fun.
That is the best villain movie or line ever.
But I told Joel, and I'll do this. I got time for 2 of them, so I'll quick do them. I'll just remind you, go back and watch the Bond episode. You'll hear these in depth. But 1, you don't need to build a giant, huge miniature set in your bar room just to explain to a bunch of gangsters you're going to kill in 2 minutes what your entire master plan is. The whole idea of that makes no sense. And it's not acceptable, because there's a way to do it where it makes sense. And just don't bother. And thirdly, if you know what the plan is the whole time, it's not advisable to pretend you're asleep right until the moment they get the nuclear weapon into the Thing. The time to take them is before they even get to Fort Knox in the first place, if you know what the plan is. So this idea that they're sleeping and pretending to be dead only until they have to act is for our benefit only. It's not for the benefit of any sort of story element that could possibly make sense. And that's just 2 of the things that are stupid about Goldfinger, which there are about 9 more.
So you're saying
there's some of that in this, I won't lie. But
you're saying that part is for your eyes only.
Oh my God!
Ah,
Nicely
I got to
done.
drop the dad joke.
Nicely
in that
done.
episode.
I rate For Your Eyes
Oh,
Only
my
much
God.
higher than Goldfinger.
You know-
But that aside, Force 10 is a favorite movie. It's got Han Solo and Indiana Jones in it. That helps. It really does help.
I've
And
got two things to say about Force 10 from Navarone. Three things. One, for years, I hated that film.
yeah,
Okay.
Two, the only scene in that that's remotely like it's
it's right.
was when they setting the charges and they realized they ran out of time. This was like a great Alistair McLean moment when they both look at each other and said, "We're out of time. 20 seconds." Well, it does give one less far to run, and they shake each other's hand. You think, yes. And something that I found out at 9:30 this morning, because I was watching both these films because I thought Ryan would nail this and I wanted to show off. I thought Ryan would ask the question and I could say, I know the answer. Yay.
Okay.
Who the chuff is Nikolai, right? Do you know and I actually I know who Nikolai actually is.
Tell me.
The link between those two films, and the only thing...
Yeah, because he says at the end, he says, you're the one that betrayed us in Greece.
Yeah.
And I've seen Force 10 30 times. And every time I hear that, I go, what?
Yeah.
I still don't get that. So good, explain it to me.
In the Guns of Navarone, when everyone first gets together and they go in the room and talk about it, and Anthony Quinn grabs the guy who's behind the door, and they say either shoot him or lock him up for a week. That's Nikolai.
It is. So that's Franco Nero's character.
Yeah.
Between the two films.
Yeah.
I was not going to ask you that, and I've never been able to figure that out. I take it as canon.
Said, do you know what the link is? And I was going to go, I know the answer.
Well done, Maz. Well done.
Well, it's still
it out this morning.
It's still Mallory and what's his face. It's the same two main characters.
Because he says to him, "You two know him, don't you?" I thought, how? Where? Why is it? And then it's the.
Well, and then why don't they recognize him? Because he's just so good in disguise.
I don't know. I mean,
we don't recognize him. It's funny that I don't think anybody gets that. I think you have to watch them back to back and be asking yourself that question to even get there. And I've never done that.
This morning, and I thought, what is the link between these two movies? Because I don't like Ben from Navarone at all.
Ideally, you can watch Guns of Navarone and then wait 17 years and watch Force 10 because Force 10 really doesn't stand up. If you watch them back to back, it's completely unacceptable because it's just a stupider, goofier movie.
I have a feeling right when they were going to release Force 10 from Navarone, someone somewhere had the idea of sticking 10 seconds at the start of that movie with those two in German uniforms wet on the bridge of a destroyer being handed a cup of coffee to try and make the link between the two movies.
Yeah. They show all this footage from Guns of Navarone, and then they splice in the two characters we're about to spend time with, and they don't even do a good job of it. They both look super happy. Like it's just bad direction. Guy Hamilton's he's a sure-handed storyteller in a fun sort of way. Like the film is accomplished visually and some other things, but he's just never seen it. He's like Richard Lester is the other director like this. Just never seen a gag that he can't do 110%. And that sinks any sort of reality of it. I still think it's fun though. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I like Force 10 for a lot of things that are in it. In fact, I like it in a way. I've seen it many more times than Guns because Guns, I got to sit down, I got to make the popcorn, I got to set aside 3 hours. I got to really give it its due when I watch it. Whereas Force 10, I can be playing Tetris. I can be, you know what I mean? I can be doing whatever. And here it is. And it's just, I know it by heart and it comforts me. It's one of those films. So, but thank you for solving the Nikolai thing. Not just for me, for everybody. Because it's this moment where you can feel this moment's supposed to land like a kaboom thing. Yeah. And it just makes you go, what?
Yeah. So that would explain this.
Have to do with anything in
Guns of
Navarone, and you figured
that would explain this line in the Wikipedia intro to Force 10 from Navarone. They're talking about Edward Fox and Harrison Ford succeeding the roles played by Gregory Peck and David Niven. It was directed by Guy Hamilton. Also stars Carl Weathers, Barbara Bach, Franco Nero, in a plastic surgery role previously played by Tuta Lemko and Richard Keel. So it's like, and I'm like, what? I remember looking at this sentence going, what the hell does that even mean? In a plastic surgery role previously played by Tuta Lemko. And it's making that connection without explicitly saying so.
There's a great scene. It's when they're captured by the bad guys where there's a lot of this in Where Eagles Dare, where Ed Fox and Robert Shaw just start making stuff up, and Harrison Ford plays along, and nobody knows what anyone's going to say next. Yeah. But it's this, if you're an improv fan, it's this improv comedy routine that they do for the benefit of this German guy. And in a worse movie, the German guy would be Colonel Klink, and he'd be fooled by all of it. But at the end of this giant thing, he's like, and then you can confirm everything with your people. And Michael Byrne, who I really do like a lot, he's like, oh, yes, we'll certainly confirm your story. You could just tell the other people are all confused, but he's like, you guys are so full of shit. And it's this fun thing, we know you're lying, and we know you're lying. That's
great if he turned. It would have been great if he turned to the camera and would have gone, "Never run."
All right, we'll end it there.
To jump out of a burning Lancaster bomber with a suitcase full of penicillin and then bury it in wood.
Well, but even that, and he refuses to open it, and they're arguing with each other.
It can't be exposed to air.
Penicillin was a new thing at the time, you guys. I know. The Germans had never heard of it. So who knows what it is? It's so good. It's funny. It's amusing to me.
Secrets of moldy cheese.
And again, Barbara Bach seems to know. You guys are all idiots, and you're in a stupid movie, and I'm going to hold down the fort while I'm on the screen. Like this is serious.
Like she did in the Bond movie she was in, actually.
Yeah, totally. Like
and she was like that. She was also like that in the fantastic movie Caveman with her husband, Ringo Starr.
Indeed.
Any chance I get to bring up Caveman, I will.
Brian, Force 10 from Navarone, man, you have been pretty quiet over there.
Yeah, I've been pretty quiet because this is like Maz. This is one of the films that when I saw it on the list, I was like, ugh.
Well, it's only here because Guns is here, and when the hell else are we going to talk about it?
And that was it. I knew it was Guns' sequel.
Like
I never made the connection until Maz, thank you. But the entire time that I looked at the list, I was like, I'll make that the last film I watch.
That'll be the lullaby of the list here. Yeah,
it's hard for me. Like I really want to get into a story. I want to get into the characters, and there's something about that film.
It's got a dinner party tone to it, where it really just doesn't let you get involved, even though there's some harsh moments and some sacrifice in it.
Yeah, and I get why you love it. I get it.
It's fun.
So you can watch it for me.
All right, I'll do that once a year, baby.
Yeah. So so these are the movies that we would watch specifically. I mean, these were the afternoon, weekend afternoon movies, like Killing Time before the Muppet Show comes on Sunday afternoons when there's no afternoon football game, or on a rainy Saturday afternoon and you can't go outside and play, and so but your dad has control of the TV channels, and there were only 5 TV channels at the time, and so he's like, we're watching Guns and Navarone. This is on, and we're watching it. It's great. You're gonna love it. Sit down. You're gonna love it. I remember that about my dad saying, "Oh, just sit down. You're gonna love this. Yeah, you're gonna love this movie." And you're like, "Okay, well, sure. I guess I'll watch it." And then my dad would inevitably fall asleep, but you still couldn't change the channel because he would know.
It's a dad power, man.
Yeah, and he'd do that. He'd do the.
I was watching that. My dad used to say,
I was watching that. Yep.
Dad movies, guys, we got to do it again sometime.
Yes, we absolutely.
One of Ryan's dad's favorite movies, just to know that it's not all automatic machine guns and stuff, is The Birdcage, which is one of my favorite movies too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that film.
Yeah. So there's other things we can talk about that aren't quite so manly and masculine as this that I think will be genuinely fun, but this felt like a good place to start. It's obviously there's some enthusiasm about these types of stories here, so that's cool.
Yep.
Well, excellent. Yeah. Well, we cannot thank you, Maz and Brian, enough for joining us.
It was a delight. Thank you.
Yeah,
for the
definitely.
invitation. I love this.
And for those of you who are watching this,
that means
on
a
video,
lot coming from a guy who makes a video blog like literally every day.
Well, I have. It's more. All that work is done by the fantastic Dana Dalval. I just there and speak. Dana puts all that together.
And we want to just before we close things out, we want to make sure we mention her and her awesome work and just her awesomeness.
She is one of our favorite people that Ryan and I have ever had the pleasure to know. And I'm guessing, Maz, you probably like her a lot too.
She is one of the most favorite people I've ever met, actually.
Yeah, I bet. We are so thankful that you guys came on. For those of you who are watching the video version of this podcast, you're going to actually witness Brian do some good dad work. In this, Ollie and Elliot coming in and taking dad away from the war.
Ooh, yeah, 10 seconds. Let me really quick tell you exactly what had happened. The boys were upset. Elliot couldn't find his shoes for some reason, and then when he came back in, he was upset and crying because Oliver took his iPad away. Then Oliver comes by and goes with his gloves on. He just holds up his finger like this. I'm like, what happened? And he's like, he cut the tip off my glove. And I'm just like, all right. Okay, you, Oliver, you wait out there. Elliot, why don't you wait over here in the chair?
That is fantastic. And this is what, and all the more, Brian, way to take the risk, way to fight through. Yeah, way to fight that. It's like sometimes you do just got to leave let the kids be kids for a couple hours, and it's like, well, some gloves are going to lose some tips, but that's the price you got to pay.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Brian, when they graduate college and move to the West Coast, it gets so much easier.
I'll believe you, Maz, because I'm still waiting for that point. I got another, let's see, 10, 12 years.
Is the way forward.
Yeah.
All right, then.
Oh boy. All right, gentlemen. Thank you all so much, and thank you, dear listener, for joining us on the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Of course, you can reach out to us on the Facebook page, the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Like us there. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter at Ask Joel and Ryan. And you can email us. AskJoelAndRyan@gmail.com. What movies did you watch with your dad? Do you want to, tell us what you watched with your parents? Or maybe we could even do what movies did you watch with your mom, if that was something that you did.
That'd be cool to hear.
Right. That would be great. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us this week. And until next time, bye now.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.
Hey, Joel, you didn't get to use your machine guns.
I was just going to press it.
Nice.
All righty.
Clint Eastwood finally running out of bullets. There you go.